Hello, this is an introduction to the idea of painting complex surfaces. An introduction, and I'm just going to briefly also look at an essential aspect of painting complex surfaces which you need to bear in mind, and that is underpainting. Underpainting is an essential aspect of painting, in any depth, really, in any complexity, in any way that is other than, rather throwaway and superficial on easel painting, and also rather just for the tabletop in miniature painting. So paint goes on in layers, of course, and you have to think about layers underneath as well as the layer that's on top if you want to have something that's subtle and has some kind of depth to it. Now, what do I mean by complex surfaces? I mean a whole range of things, and this has come out really of doing a previous video in which I mentioned some steps I'd made myself for myself. I mean, maybe it's commonly out there, but for myself it's quite a revelation in painting hair and painting fur and painting, well, like the hair on the body of a horse, which is therefore horse flesh really as you see it. All of these kinds of surfaces that have a complex organic surface which is changeable in the light and has depth and has sheen to it. But it began with hair for me, trying to push it a little bit further, and I discovered some, in many instances it's just specific paints actually, but also some other techniques in order to render it more faithfully. And that was partly a reaction to seeing a video by somebody else about producing it for the tabletop quickly, easy for a beginner, and suggesting that it should be dry brushed hair in order to pick up on the individual strands on the model and to have that kind of complexity. Well, that is a disaster, as I've said before. To me, it doesn't get any of the quality of what hair is really like, or fur, or a horse, its hair and mane. It's no good. You've got to have other ways of doing it. And this is an example of a complex surface. Here we have some models, and one of the things that's going on here is painting the flesh, obviously. And one of the ways that I paint the flesh, there's several different ways I do it for different, and I vary it deliberately because flesh varies so much from one individual to another. But one of the ways is to paint it with a burnt red in Vallejo paint, underpainting. Now, traditionally in fine art, I'm going to move the camera now, excuse me, to show you something. One of the major ways of underpainting flesh was to do this. Now this is rather stunning. This is from a painting in the National Gallery by Michelangelo, and it's unfinished, as you can see, particularly in the figures on the left. He's peculiar in the way that he painted, Michelangelo, in that he would sort of paint in a very finished way as he moved over a surface, more than most. But this was partly the technique that he was using here, which is tempera, which actually in its effect isn't so very different from acrylics, the acrylics that you are probably using on your miniatures. Tempera is closer to acrylics than it is to oil paint in many ways. Anyway, what he's done here is to paint the flesh, underpaint it with green. And it would have been the same with all these figures where the flesh is apparently finished. He paints it with green because the green, as you know, is a complementary. And for this, I'd really like everyone who hasn't, or maybe who even has, watched my video Major Tip Colour Parts 1 and 2, Complementaries and Modulation, which I'll put the link for down below. It's a two-part thing about colour and complementaries, and goes into it in depth and how you mix complementaries towards a vital grey instead of just mixing black and white in. Here you have a green so that it would complement the red in the pink of the flesh, and it gives a much more vital surface than you would otherwise have. It also picks up on things that you do see in flesh, colours and tones that you do pick up, greens and blues in the veins. But the major thing is that this is an underpainting in the inner complementary, and it's not just in fine art that you can use this. I'm not suggesting that miniatures flesh should be painted in green, because that would be much too it's too small an area to bother with that, really, for it to work well. I have tried it, it doesn't really pay off. What pays off much better is to paint in either a dark red or other colours, which we'll talk about when I look at one of the complex surfaces to deal with that is flesh. It's probably the most complex surface of all, really. So I'll come to that later. But the whole of this is really about trying to do something that is more subtle, more complicated than the kind of things that you see here. This is painting war, the Dark Age issue, and I bought this because I felt I should, but I've got to say it's appalling in some of the dyes that it has these miniatures represented by, really. It's the production of synthetic dyes in modern times, the industrial production of synthetic dyes, that has allowed many paints to be produced, like the chrome yellows that Vincent van Gogh used and was beloved by him. And that's all great, and it's been a liberation for painting. But in the Dark Ages, they wouldn't have had these synthetic dyes, which have given rise to these paints that you have available. So you need, if you want any kind of realism, instead of kind of subtlety, not these absolutely neon colours, these colours that would have been impossible at the time, impossibly bright. They were using natural dyes, and again and again you see colours that are just not right on the tabletop. So if you want something that's deeper and more subtle, this series of videos, I hope, will be of interest to you. The other complex surfaces that I'll go through the list that I intend to investigate briefly. Hair, fur, horseflesh as one episode, as one video. Flesh as another. Dirt and ingrained wear and tear, which is one of my very most favourite things to do, and which, soldiers on campaign generally, but especially in periods like the early medieval period, it's perfect for. And this is all, it's so pleasurable, I think, I find, to put these in. They wouldn't be walking onto a battlefield pristine. They will almost certainly have marched miles and be sweaty, dirty, mucky, even just by going about their ordinary duties, even if they're, at home, but on guard. And very quickly, they didn't have washing machines available. They didn't have, bio washing powders and so forth. Everything is much more organic, and there's a great pleasure in painting that, it seems to me. So another one is that dirt, ingrained wear and tear, and then linens and other materials that have complex wove in them that you can't paint every thread in the weft of a textile. So you have to do it through paint layering, and that is a complex surface again. And then metals. One of the major things I'd like to do a video on is burnishing, which hasn't been properly covered by anyone else as far as I can tell, or it hadn't been some time ago. So I'll go into some of the intricacies of burnishing metal miniatures to get different qualities of metal that really does catch the light in an unpredictable and realistic way, which I think is a marvellous thing to make use of. There are probably others as well that I'll think of, but that's the main list of complex surfaces. So just think about underpainting, if you will, if you'd like this. I'd be really interested to see if people are. Somebody expressed interest in the hair, but are you interested in a series of these videos on these subjects? I'd really like to know. And it is very encouraging to have comments, and likes, and for people to say this, because I don't want to spend time making videos on things that people are not that bothered about. But here we have a piece of flesh that I have painted green, and that is because it's a severed head. I hope that is in focus. The other flesh, the living flesh of this Viking character, was underpainted with dark red, burnt red. The difference between his flesh and the flesh of this head is that the flesh of the head is obviously dead. So I'm painting it green for a change, and I'm expecting that what I'll get in the end is something that has a different tone to it. It will still be basically flesh colour, but it will just have a different kind of quality that will register it as being different. And this is the key thing in complex surfaces, that it's just a little bit more than what you initially see. When my relatives come round, I don't know whether any of this is picked up on my videos because I'm using this crappy phone camera. I can't afford to invest in anything else really. I have to make the videos very quickly without edits, but when my family come round and they look at these things, there's always this initial sort of bit of amusement. Oh, you're still doing this, painting these things as well as painting what you do in the studio. Funny little miniatures. And then as they look at them, they get drawn in and they look for some time, and I can always tell that there's a little bit of surprise at what they're seeing, that suddenly they're drawn into this kind of miniature reality that has a depth to it, that isn't just, being banged out for the tabletop. Now I can totally appreciate that for many people that is perfectly adequate, and that's, you know, more than reasonable thing to do. But if you want a bit more and take a bit more pleasure really in the painting as an activity, then it seems to me that this kind of idea of you know, painting in more depth, painting in layers, painting complex surfaces that we see around us that our eyes are constantly adjusting to, might be interesting. Anyway, please like and subscribe if you will. Leave a comment, and we'll see about following up on this. Thanks for watching.